The Brothers Karamazov, Book 5, Chapter 6. The story picks up as Alyosha and Ivan have been speaking for the last 3 chapters at the tavern, with Ivan seemingly doing about 98% of the speaking. The previous chapter, Ivan has told his prose style poem, The Grand Inquisitor, one of the highest points of literature, really. Certainly the center, the meat of this novel. And as he's walking away from this meeting that's lasted the previous 3 chapters, Ivan doesn't feel good about himself. You're led to think he feels cold, depressed, something that almost seems like shame. And Dostoevsky seems to be teasing us with the fact that maybe Ivan regrets something he says to Alyosha, or maybe you think that he, at the very least, maybe regrets the way he phrased something. But as the paragraphs move on, and as you read the first page and a half of this chapter, you realize that that's not it at all. This is really who Ivan is. He didn't step out of character to speak to Alyosha. It's not that. That can't be what's bugging him. And then he finally realizes what's bugging him, and exactly as he realizes what's bugging him, here embodied is the bugging himself, Smerdyakov. And so Ivan returns to his father's house, and the servant and bastard son Smerdyakov is standing there. And just as Ivan realizes that that's who he's annoyed at, and that's what's got him downcast and depressed, he actually sees Smerdyakov. And I think that that is exactly what Dostoevsky is doing here. Smerdyakov for Ivan is almost a projection, or maybe a better word is a dramatization, or externalization, a 3-dimensional figure of what is going on in Ivan's mind. In other words, Ivan is this tension between rational thought and not liking the conclusion, the logical conclusion, practically outworked the logical conclusion to his rational thought. And Smerdyakov actually embodies in person the thing that Ivan hates the most. And so Ivan is sort of reflecting, and you also, you have got, 2 layers going on in this chapter. You actually have a dialogue that ensues between Smerdyakov and Ivan, but then you have Ivan thinking about what he thinks about Smerdyakov. So you have Ivan reflecting on the relationship, and then the relationship actually being played out through this dialogue. And so Ivan reflects on what he thinks about Smerdyakov, and I think it reflects what Ivan thinks, the tension of Ivan's sort of thought and heart, his thought and how life actually plays out. That contrast, or butts up against, or is in tension with real life. And so what it has Ivan so downcast is that there was this initial honeymoon stage, this initial flirtation, this initial almost fascination with Smerdyakov. So just like Ivan does with ideas, they sound new and shiny and interesting and exciting. But then when you follow that idea to its logical conclusion, now it's banal, it's old, it's selfish, it's prideful, it's vain. And so that is true of some of Ivan's ideas, and it's true of Smerdyakov. And if you think about it, that's really how all evil works. There seems to be something really fascinating about the villain in a movie, or the bad guy in the TV show. And there's an initial attraction to it because we wish that we could be like that. We wish that we could be the person that has such strength and courage, that all these other sheep play by the rules, but here is this rebel that doesn't play by society or the churches or culture or whatever's rules. And here's this person, and if we could be a little bit like them, and especially if we were attractive and had cool gadgets, we think that being the villain, being the bad guy, is really a lot more interesting than being this vanilla, rule-following good guy. But the problem is that evil is banal. People who are evil are by nature usually narcissistic and self-centered. And so when you're around people like that in real life, they're actually very boring to be around. Evil is not creative or inventive. It always does the same few things. And so Ivan is realizing that there was this initial attraction to Smerdyakov, and now he is prideful. He puts himself on Ivan's intellectual level completely undeservedly, and he's really just a dirtbag. He's a scumbag. So he's Ivan's ideas without Ivan's character. So the only thing worse, I think, for Dostoevsky than to be in tension between your ideas and your life is when your ideas are bad and there's not even a tension there. And so Smerdyakov is Ivan gone wrong. So the conversation ensues. That's sort of what Ivan thinks about Smerdyakov. And now the conversation ensues, and it just stinks to high heavens. Now imagine you are a homicide detective, and you really had no video or strong clues about who murdered the victim, but you had a couple leads. And the first person you called in, they walked in to the interrogation room, and all of a sudden they had 4 receipts from the different stores that they had gone to that evening. And they didn't even know they were going to be called in to be interrogated. And not only did they have 4 receipts, they also have this story that doesn't sound, when they tell it, like it's the first time they've told it. It sounds really rehearsed. And not only does it sound rehearsed, there's way too many details. That's not how people tell stories and add in all these details. It sounds really rehearsed. And not only do they have 4 receipts to serve as their alibi, and not only do they have a really canned, corny story, then they've got their own suspect, and they just keep pushing every point of the conversation to talk about some other person who killed the victim. Now that would seem suspicious, and an intelligent homicide detective wouldn't fall for that. And that's exactly what Smerdyakov does here to Ivan's detective work. So Ivan ignores what he wants to say and instead decides to treat Smerdyakov with some civility. And he walks up and he says, "Have you seen my father?" And Smerdyakov says, "No, that's not my job. I don't keep tabs on him." And then Smerdyakov just starts off in the strangest form of conversation, and all these things will pay off later. I'm trying not to do a spoiler alert if it's the first time you've read the book, but Smerdyakov now goes and says 6 highly suspicious things. Thing number 1, he brings up sort of out of the blue, for no reason, with no context. Number 1 out of 6 weird thing he says is he immediately begins to question Ivan about when and where and if he's going to go away. So Ivan wants to go to Moscow to begin his tour of Western Europe, and Fyodor wants Ivan to hold off on that and rather take care of some timber business for him. But either way, Ivan is supposed to leave the next day on either the business or the trip. And Smerdyakov seems to be almost pushing him out the door, almost in a hurry for Ivan to leave. And so that doesn't really make sense. Why would Smerdyakov want Ivan gone so much? So that's number 1. Then number 2, he brings up the tensions between he and Fyodor and Dmitri. And the tensions are, he blames both Fyodor and Dmitri of constantly questioning and pumping Smerdyakov for information about Grushenka's whereabouts and what she's thinking and what she's doing. And he really wants to play up, which it's true, but he really wants to ignite this, an explosion between Dmitri and Fyodor. It's almost as if, number 1, he wants Ivan out of town, and number 2, he wants to paint Dmitri in a really bad light and the relationship between he and Fyodor in the worst possible light. Number 3, he's turned the tables now on himself and, puts in awkwardly in the conversation for no reason. I'm epileptic. I have seizures, and sometimes I can get a really bad seizure at a really bad place at the top of the stairs or the top of the ladder. And then if I get a seizure at just the wrong time, you know me, I'm really incapacitated. It's really inconvenient. I could never be charged with anything after I've had a seizure. Nothing could ever pinned on me. So, number one, he wants Ivan out of the picture. Number two, he wants to paint Dmitri in the worst light possible. And number three, he wants to be seen as this medically handicapped person who is incapacitated for long periods of time. Then he goes on to drop in the conversation to Ivan, oh, by the way, I've given away all the signals that only your dad, Fyodor, and I knew. Cough twice if knock twice fast, and then a third time really hard if Grushenka's coming, knock 3 times if she, all these signals, all these knocking, coughing, caw kind of signals. And Smerdyakov says, oh, by the way, I told Dmitri those. Why? What is Smerdyakov planning? Why does he want someone to know in the future that only Dmitri would have known the signals that Fyodor and Smerdyakov had worked out? Okay, so let's review. He wants Ivan out of town. He wants Dmitri and Fyodor's relationship to be explosive and potentially violent. He wants himself to be a poor victim of an epileptic seizure. And now he wants Dmitri to have the knowledge. So I guess number 2, the motive, and number 4, the ability. And then he's not done. Well, Ivan counters because Ivan's intelligent. Well, even if all that's true, guess who's still at home? Grigory and his wife. And you'll never guess, Smerdyakov already has a rebuttal prepared for that. Well, they're on this new sleeping medication, and so they're out cold, and they would never be suspicious or awake. You couldn't rouse them from their sleep if someone were to come attack Fyodor in his sleep. Grigory can't be relied upon at all. So Ivan, looking at these first 5 excuses, he says, this is nonsense. It sounds really planned. It sounds really arranged. It sounds really scripted. And Smerdyakov says, no. You're not getting it. You're not getting it. You don't realize how your brother talks. So he's already trashed Dmitri twice. He said that, he's got this temper, that he has the ability because I told him the secrets. And now he says, listen, Dmitri is already counting on this money that's your father's. He already is spending these 3,000 rubles in his head. And so Smerdyakov has these 6 things. Trying to get Ivan out of the picture, trying to get Dmitri and Fyodor's relationship in the worst light possible, trying to excuse and recuse himself by talking about his epileptic seizures, trying to give Dmitri the ability by saying he knows the signals, trying to clear out all other possible parties if Fyodor was ever killed by excusing Grigory and his wife, and finally a motive, saying Dmitri needs 3,000 rubles. And so Ivan just looks at all this strangely, and our narrator tells us that really both of their personalities have changed. Ivan knows that something is up. He's too smart for this. He verbalizes it, but also internally he knows that Smerdyakov is up to something, and Smerdyakov probably doesn't have the best poker face. And so our narrator wants us to know here at the end of the chapter that both are different than they were in their countenance, in their chest thumping, and their boldness. Both of them are a little bit different, and I think what the narrator is trying to say is that Ivan is really skeptical of what Smerdyakov. He can totally smell that Smerdyakov, which is his name, the smelly one. Remember, his mother was stinking Lizaveta, and so Smerdyakov is the smelly one, and Ivan says, the smelly one smells. And Smerdyakov is probably wondering, did I go a little too far just now? Did I overplay my hand? Was I really obvious that I'm trying to create an alibi and create a scapegoat simultaneously? And so that's where this chapter ends. However, I think it's a significant turning point when you look back to a previous episode, and that previous episode was when we had the 4 brothers in a room together with father. Dmitri had broken into the room and had stomped Fyodor and made his head bleed. And at that point, Ivan and Alyosha were able to break up the fight, and Dmitri ran off, and Alyosha attended to his father for an hour, and then after he was okay in bed, he walked outside to where Ivan was sitting in the garden, and Ivan said to Alyosha, speaking of the fight an hour earlier between Dmitri and his father, that these two lizards would take themselves out. In other words, they would create their own justice, that two bad people would take care of each other, is basically what Ivan was getting at. And Alyosha was disturbed by that, and so he gave Ivan a look like, basically, what do you mean? You're talking about our blood brother and our father, and you're saying, kind of let the prisoners, let the criminals take care of themselves, let them police themselves. How horrible. And Ivan, basically said to Alyosha, don't look so shocked. When it comes down to it, look, I just saved our old man's life. Well, it seems like that was Ivan's opinion last night. But now here, what's he going to do at the end of the chapter? He still plans on leaving. And so here, our narrator here, Dostoevsky, is still showing how in tension Ivan's character is. Why? Because in his mind, he has to know that Smerdyakov is up to something. But when it comes time to doing, to living, to loving, to do the right thing, what are Ivan's plans? To leave. And so here is always the thing that's going on. You can like Ivan's ideas better than you like Alyosha's. You can agree with Ivan's conclusions more than you agree with Alyosha's. But when there's a boy getting hit by rocks, when there's a puppy who's hurt, Alyosha is there. When a father can potentially be killed, Ivan leaves town. And so the tension between what he believes and how he behaves is unfortunate in this chapter.